In the 41st millennium, there is only war. 1,000,000 worlds burn under the Emperor's gaze, and faith is the only currency that matters. But what happens when something falls from beyond the stars, something small, armed, and utterly unwilling to kneel? The Imperium had cataloged every Xenos threat, every demon manifestation, every heretical deviation. They were unprepared for a coffee-addicted assassin shaped like a legume. Manufactorum Hive Secundus processed ore from the mining shafts below, feeding the endless war machine of the Astra Militarum. 12-hour shifts bled into 14, then 16. The workers, hunched, augmented, their lungs scarred black from toxic fumes, never questioned their lot. Questioning was heresy. Heresy was death. The viewport exploded inward at 300 hours. Glass rained down on the assembly line as something small punched through reinforced transparent steel. Alarm shrieked, workers scattered, their overseers screaming for order. Through the smoke and shattered glass stepped a figure no more than 4 feet tall. Killerbean hit the ferrocrete floor in a 3-point stance, dual golden desert eagles still gripped in his hands. His brown, coffee bean-shaped body was scuffed but intact. His sunglasses, somehow unbroken, reflected the dim amber gong-han lighting. He straightened slowly, scanning the vast industrial hellscape around him. Where the hell am I? His voice was flat, professional. No panic, just assessment. The workers stared. Some dropped their tools. Others made the sign of the Aquila and whispered prayers to the God Emperor. One brave overseer, augmented with a voxcaster implanted in his throat, stepped forward. "Intruder, you are in violation of Imperial Decree 774. Surrender your weapons and submit to..." Bean's right pistol snapped up. The shot took the voxcaster clean off the man's neck without touching flesh. Sparks fountained from severed wiring. The overseer collapsed, screaming. "Next person who tells me what to do gets more than their radio removed," Bean said. He holstered one pistol and checked his ammunition. 3 magazines left, maybe 50 rounds total. Not good. The manufactorum's massive doors ground open. Boots hammered against metal, disciplined, synchronized. Bean's enhanced reflexes registered the sound instantly. Military. Professional military. 20 Astra Militarum guardsmen poured through the entrance, lace guns raised. Their flak armor was scratched and stained, their faces hard beneath steel helmets. At their head strode Commissar Vorton, a tall man whose black greatcoat swept the floor. His bolt pistol was already drawn, his other hand resting on his Chainsword's activation stud. "Xenos incursion," Vorton announced to his troops. "Standard extermination protocol. Fire on my..." He stopped. His augmented eye, a bulky brass contraption that clicked and whirred, focused on the small figure before him. "What in the Emperor's name is that?" Bean tilted his head slightly. "I could ask you the same question. You all shop at the same dystopian military surplus store." Silence. The guardsmen exchanged confused glances. Their weapons remained trained on Bean, but uncertainty rippled through their ranks. Vorton's jaw tightened. "You will identify yourself immediately, or be terminated as a threat to the God Emperor's domain." "God Emperor?" Bean's tone held genuine curiosity mixed with skepticism. "Let me guess. Religious dictatorship, mandatory worship, probably some kind of thought police." He surveyed the terrified workers, the oppressive architecture, the grim-faced soldiers. "Yeah, this checks out." "Heresy!" one guardsman shouted. Vorton raised his hand. "Hold fire!" His augmented eye zoomed in, analyzing. "You're armed. You're dangerous. But you're not Tyranid, not Orc, not Eldar, not any Xenos in Imperial records." His voice dropped. "What are you?" Killerbean, professional assassin, and right now, extremely lost. Bean's stance remained relaxed, but his fingers never left his pistols. I was in the middle of a job when some kind of rift opened up. Next thing I know, I'm crashing through your window. So here's the deal. You tell me where I am, and I don't demonstrate why 20 soldiers with laser pointers aren't a threat. Vortin's hand tightened on his chainsword. You dare. Bean moved. It wasn't superhuman speed by 40k standards, no Eldar blur, no Space Marine gene-enhanced power. But it was precise. Bean dove left as 3 guardsmen fired, their last bolt scorching air where he'd stood milliseconds before. He rolled, came up firing. His first shot destroyed a guardsman's lace gun, the weapon exploding in a shower of sparks. His second shot took out a support pillar, dropping a section of catwalk onto 3 more soldiers. Vortin roared orders. The guardsmen spread out, professional training taking over. But Bean was already moving. A cartwheel that took him behind industrial machinery, a wall run that positioned him above his attackers, a precision shot that severed the chain holding a massive cargo container. The container crashed down, blocking half the firing lines. Stand down, Vortin's voice cut through the chaos. Cease fire. The shooting stopped. In the sudden silence, Bean's voice echoed from somewhere in the shadows of the machinery. I could have killed 6 of you already. I didn't. That's called restraint, something you might want to try before this gets ugly. Vortin's augmented eye scanned the darkness. He couldn't locate the target. The small creature, whatever it was, had disappeared into the manufacturum's maze of pipes and machinery like smoke. You claim to be an assassin, Vortin called out. If true, you understand chain of command, hierarchy, orders. He holstered his bolt pistol slowly. I'm willing to negotiate if you're willing to listen. A pause. Then Bean emerged from behind a generator, pistol still drawn but pointed at the floor. His sunglasses reflected Vortin's own face back at him. I'm listening. Vortin studied the strange being before him. 4 feet tall, bean-shaped. Armed with primitive slug throwers that somehow possessed impossible accuracy. No warp signature, no Xenos markers, just an anomaly. You're on Mordaxis Prime subsector Ultima. You're in Imperium space, under the protection and law of the God Emperor of mankind. Vortin's voice was measured now, calculating. You say you're lost. That suggests you don't serve the enemy. Yet, Bean repeated. That's doing a lot of work in that sentence. Indeed. Vortin gestured to his troops. They lowered their weapons slightly but remained alert. Every world in the Imperium serves one purpose, feeding the war machine that keeps humanity alive. You're either with us or against us. There is no neutral ground. Bean's fingers drummed against his pistol grips. And if I'm neither, then you're a threat to be eliminated. Vortin's smile was cold. But I think you're smarter than that, Killerbean. You assessed my troops in seconds. You controlled your fire to disable, not kill. That's discipline, professionalism. He stepped closer. We could use someone with your skills. The Emperor protects those who serve him well. I don't serve, Bean said flatly. I work contracts. Big difference. Then perhaps, Vortin said, his augmented eye clicking thoughtfully, we can discuss terms. Above them, through the shattered viewport, the sky of Mordaxis Prime revealed itself. A bruised purple expanse choked with industrial smog, where 3 moons hung like watching eyes. Somewhere in that poisoned sky, the warp churned with interest. Something small and strange had fallen into the 41st millennium. And the 41st millennium was about to learn that size meant nothing when backed by perfect aim and absolute refusal to submit. If you crave stories of cosmic collisions where the smallest heroes face the darkest millennium, smash that subscribe button. The Emperor protects those who bear witness to the impossible. The Commissar's quarters were Spartan, a metal desk bolted to the floor, a single flickering Lumo globe, and a wall-mounted Aquila that had seen better centuries. Vortin poured 2 tin cups of recaf, the Imperium's poor substitute for coffee. It smelled like burnt rubber and desperation. Killerbean stared at the cup pushed toward him across the desk. He lifted his sunglasses just enough to examine the dark liquid, then let them drop back down. This is supposed to be coffee? It's recaf, standard Astra Militarum issue. Vortin took a sip without flinching. It keeps you awake. That's all that matters. Bean pushed the cup away. I've had motor oil that looked more appetizing. 4 guardsmen stood at attention by the door, lace guns ready but not raised. Vortin had cleared the manufactorum workers and established a temporary command post in the overseer's office. Through the reinforced windows, the hive sprawled endlessly, smokestacks belching. Wu ran into the perpetual twilight, conveyor systems moving ore toward distant forges, and everywhere the hunched figures of workers who had forgotten what freedom looked like. Vortin leaned back in his chair, studying his unusual guest. You said you were in the middle of a job when you arrived. What kind of job? The kind where people pay me to remove problems they can't handle themselves. Bean's tone was matter of fact. Target was a Shadow Bean operative, high-value elimination. I was closing in when reality decided to have a stroke. Shadow Bean. Vortin's augmented eye word, recording. Another faction from your origin world. Something like that. Bean wasn't volunteering more. Point is, I'm here now. Your universe has some seriously unstable physics if interdimensional rifts just open up during firefights. The warp, Vortin said grimly. It's not physics. It's hell itself bleeding into reality. The Immaterium, a realm of demons and nightmares that connects all space. He watched Bean's reaction carefully. You said you passed through something during transit. The warp leaves marks, corruption, madness, yet you seem unaffected. Bean's fingers drummed against the armrest. I've been through worse than bad dreams. If that's your hell, it needs better marketing. Vortin's jaw tightened. Billions have died screaming from warp exposure. Entire worlds have been consumed by demonic incursions. You should not be sitting here making jokes about... Jokes, Bean interrupted. Commissar, I'm a 4-foot-tall bean-shaped assassin having a conversation with a military officer in a universe I've never heard of. If I don't find some humor in this situation, I'm going to start questioning my sanity. Silence. Then, unexpectedly, Vortin's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Fair enough. He pulled the data slate from his desk drawer and slid it across. These are the current threats to Mordaxis Prime. Traitor Guard elements, suspected Chaos cult activity in Hive Tertius, and persistent orc raids on the southern mining operations. Bean studied the slate. The technology was crude by his standards, a blocky interface with flickering text in a language he somehow understood. Another gift from the warp exposure, he suspected. The mission details were straightforward. Target locations, threat assessments, Imperial response protocols. You want me to work for you, Bean said. I want you to prove you're not a threat, Vortin corrected. You claim to be a professional. Professionals understand contracts. You need ammunition. Your primitive weapons won't function without it. You need intelligence on how to navigate Imperium space. You need protection from those who would see you as Xenos filth to be purged. He tapped the data slate. I can provide all of that. In exchange, you eliminate threats I designate. And if I refuse... Vortin's hand moved to his bolt pistol. The guardsman by the door tensed. Then I execute you as a Xenos threat and file the appropriate paperwork. Your corpse will be examined by the Adeptus Mechanicus, dissected, catalogued, and forgotten. Bean's sunglasses reflected the Commissar's cold expression. You know, most people try to make job offers sound appealing. This is the 41st millennium, Killerbean. Nothing here is appealing. There is only survival through service, or death through resistance. Vortin leaned forward. But I watched you in that manufactorum. You're fast, precise, efficient. You disabled my men without killing them, which means you understand discrimination of force. That's rare. His augmented eye clicked. The Imperium doesn't tolerate independence, but it rewards results. Give me results, and I'll ensure you have the resources to continue existing. Bean picked up the data slate again, scrolling through the missions. Chaos Cult in Hive Tertius, high civilian presence, embedded in population centers. Target, cult leadership. Collateral damage assessment, acceptable up to 30% population loss. 30%. This says you're willing to accept killing thousands of civilians to eliminate the cult leadership, Bean said slowly. Chaos corruption spreads like disease. Better to amputate the limb than lose the body. Vortin's voice held no doubt, no hesitation. This is standard Imperial doctrine. Mercy is weakness. Weakness invites death. Bean set the slate down carefully. I don't do collateral damage if it can be avoided. Precision strikes, in and out. Target neutralized, bystanders alive. Bystanders. Vortin's laugh was bitter. There are no bystanders in the Emperor's Imperium. Every citizen is a soldier, every worker a weapon in the war against extinction. If they're in a Chaos Cult's territory, they're already compromised. Or they're hostages, or they're ignorant. Or they're just trying to survive in a system that grinds them into paste. Bean stood, his small frame casting a surprisingly sharp shadow in the Lumoglobe's light. I've worked in war zones before, Commissar. I know the difference between targets and victims. Vortin's expression darkened. You presume to lecture me on warfare? I've commanded troops across 17 campaigns. I've ordered exterminatus protocols. I've executed cowards and rewarded heroes. Do not mistake my offer for negotiation. This is charity. Accept or die. The guardsmen raised their lace guns. The air crackled with tension. Bean's hands moved to his pistols, not drawing, just resting on the grips. His bullet time perception kicked in. He could see the micro-expressions on each soldier's face, calculate firing angles, assess cover options. 4 guardsmen, 1 commissar. Reinforced door behind him, window to his left. Doable but messy. Here's my counteroffer, Bean said quietly. I'll take your contract. I'll eliminate your Chaos Cult leadership. But I do it my way. Surgical, precise, minimal collateral. You get your results. I get ammunition and intel. We both walk away satisfied. And if your way fails, Vortin demanded. It won't. Confidence is admirable. Arrogance is fatal. I've been doing this longer than you've been breathing. Bean's voice carried absolute certainty. Give me the target. I'll bring you their heads. But I won't massacre civilians to do it. Vortin studied the small figure before him. Every instinct screamed this was a mistake, allowing an unknown entity autonomy, trusting in methods outside Imperial doctrine, showing flexibility where only rigid obedience should exist. But he'd also seen what Bean could do. Speed, precision, tactical awareness that rivaled veteran kill teams. And more importantly, desperation clawed at Mordaxus Prime. The Chaos Cult had evaded 3 purge attempts. Standard Imperial doctrine had failed. Perhaps unorthodox methods were required. 1 mission, Vortin said finally. You eliminate the cult leadership. If you succeed with minimal civilian casualties, we continue this arrangement. If you fail, or if your methods prove insufficient, I will personally put a bolt round through whatever passes for your brain." Bean extended his hand across the desk, a gesture from another world, another time. Vortin stared at it, confused. Then understanding dawned. He gripped Bean's small hand in his own. "Deal," Bean said. The handshake was brief, but in that moment, Commissar Vortin felt something he hadn't experienced in decades of Imperial service: uncertainty. This small, strange creature from beyond the stars didn't fear the Imperium, didn't worship the Emperor, didn't accept the inevitable grinding horror of the 41st millennium. Killerbean operated on his own terms, and somehow he'd convinced a commissar of the Astra Militarum to allow it. Outside, the manufactorum continued its endless production. But in the darkened corners of Hive Tertius, something twisted and wrong stirred. The Chaos Cult had felt the warp rift that brought Bean into this reality. They recognized the touch of the immaterium on his soul, and they wanted it. Hive Tertius squatted on Mordaxis Prime's southern continent like a diseased tumor. 40 million souls crammed into rust-streaked spires that clawed at the polluted sky. Bean crouched on a ventilation shaft 300 meters above the underhive, watching the crowds flow through the narrow streets below. Even at this height, the stench was overwhelming. Unwashed bodies, reclaimed sewage, and something else. Something rotten. Vortin's intelligence package had been thorough, if brutal in its assessment. The Chaos Cult called themselves the Crimson Apostles, low-level Cornate worshippers who'd converted an abandoned processing plant into their temple. Estimated membership: 200 cultists, civilian population in surrounding sectors, 40,000, Imperial solution, orbital bombardment, acceptable losses, total. Bean's solution: find the leadership, eliminate them, let the cult collapse without its command structure. He'd insisted on going alone. Vortin had protested, loudly, but ultimately conceded when Bean demonstrated he could disappear into the Hive's infrastructure like smoke. The Commissar had provided him with 3 magazines of solid slug ammunition, a Vox speed for communication, and a warning. The moment you show weakness, the cult will tear you apart. Chaos doesn't negotiate. Bean adjusted the Vox speed in his ear. He still wasn't sure of his own anatomy in this form. "I'm in position, eyes on the target location." Static crackled. Then Vortin's voice, tinny and distorted. "Confirmed. Our auger arrays detect heavy activity in that sector. Proceed with caution. The warp signature there is unusually strong." Define unusually strong. Strong enough that our sanctioned psychers refuse to look in that direction. Bean's grip tightened on his Desert Eagles. Great. Love working without complete intel. He descended through the ventilation system, his compact frame allowing access to passages no human could navigate. The deeper he went, the more the air changed, from merely toxic to actively malevolent. The metal walls were covered in scratched symbols that hurt to look at directly. Dried blood formed patterns that seemed to writhe in his peripheral vision. Bean's bullet-time perception flickered. For a split second, the corridor stretched infinitely before him, then snapped back to normal dimensions. The warp exposure during his transit was still affecting him, minor temporal distortions that came and went without warning. He emerged in an abandoned hab block, its residents long fled or killed. Graffiti covered every surface, 8 pointed stars, screaming faces, phrases in a language that made his brain itch. Through a collapsed wall, he could see the processing plant. It had been transformed. The industrial machinery remained, but now skulls were piled around the conveyor belts. The furnaces burned with flames that cast no light, only shadow. And at the center, on a platform constructed from welded bones and scrap metal, stood 3 figures. The cult leadership. Bean pulled out a compact scope, salvaged from a guardsman's rifle, and observed. The first figure was massive, easily 7 feet tall, his body swollen with unnatural muscle. Brass chains wrapped around his torso, and a 2-handed chain axe rested across his shoulders. His face was a ruin of scar tissue and rage. The second was thinner, almost skeletal, wearing robes made from human skin. He chanted constantly, words that made the air shimmer and twist. A sanctioned psyker, Bean guessed, but gone horribly wrong. The third was a woman, surprisingly normal in appearance, except for her eyes. They were completely black, reflecting no light. She held a data slate and seemed to be coordinating the cultists below. The administrator, the planner. 200 cultists moved through the processing plant with disturbing coordination. They weren't the mindless rabble Bean had expected. These were organized, disciplined, almost military in their efficiency. They were preparing something, stacking crates, drawing ritual circles, chanting in unison. Bean's Vox speed crackled. Status report. 3 primary targets confirmed. Large concentration of cultists. I count at least 150, possibly more in the lower levels. They're organized, Commissar. This isn't random worship. They're planning something big. All the more reason for immediate orbital strike. I can have a lance battery on target in... Negative. Civilians are still in the surrounding sectors. I can hear them through the walls. Families, children. You fire that lance battery, you kill everyone. Acceptable losses. Vorton's voice was cold. The cult must be purged. Not while I'm running this operation. Bean sighted on the massive cultist leader. Perfect headshot opportunity. One trigger pull and the brute would drop. But something made him hesitate. The cultists below suddenly stopped moving. All of them. 200 bodies frozen mid-motion, heads turning in perfect unison toward Bean's hiding spot. The skeletal psyker's voice echoed across the processing plant, amplified by warp energy. We know you're there, little anomaly. We felt you the moment you touched our reality. The warp remembers. The blood god thirsts for the strange one who survived the crossing. Bean's bullet time flickered again. For a heartbeat, he saw the cultists as they truly were. Twisted things wearing human skin, their forms writhing with demonic influence. Then reality snapped back. Well, Bean muttered, so much for stealth. The massive cultist leader roared, a sound that shook dust from the rafters, and pointed his chain axe at Bean's position. Blood for the blood god. Bring me the warp touched. Cultists swarmed toward his location. Bean didn't wait. He dropped through the collapsed floor, rolled, came up firing. His first 2 shots took out the closest cultists, center mass, instant drops. His training said go for headshots, but these cultists didn't go down easy. One took 3 rounds before finally collapsing. Vorton, they're enhanced. Probable chaos augmentation. This is going to get messy. Withdrawal recommended. I'm calling in the bombardment. Negative. Give me time to... A cultist crashed through the wall behind him, wielding a crude chainsword. Bean spun, fired twice. The cultist's knee exploded, then his weapon arm. He fell screaming. Bean put a final round through his skull and kept moving. The processing plant was a maze of conveyor belts, furnaces, and suspended platforms. Bean used it all, wall running along vertical surfaces, swinging from pipes, maintaining constant motion. His Desert Eagles barked rhythmically, each shot precise even while airborne. Cultists fell with destroyed kneecaps, shattered weapon hands, ruined throats. He wasn't aiming to kill most of them, just disable, create chaos, break their coordinated assault. But they kept coming, and worse, They were learning. The Psyker was directing them, using warp sight to predict Bean's movements. Cultists began cutting off his escape routes, herding him toward the central platform, where the three leaders waited. Bean landed on the platform, both pistols raised. The massive leader grinned, showing teeth filed to points. "The little morsel comes to us. How convenient." "I've fought bigger," Bean said. They all died disappointed. The chain axe roared to life. The leader charged, surprisingly fast for his bulk. Bean dodged left, fired 3 rounds into the man's leg. The bullets buried themselves in muscle, but didn't slow him. Chaos augmentation, definitely. Bean rolled under the chain axe's sweep, came up, fired at the Psyker. The skeletal cultist gestured lazily. Bean's bullets stopped mid-air, frozen in warp energy, then fell harmlessly to the ground. "You cannot harm us, anomaly," the Psyker hissed. "The warp protects its chosen." Bean's perception flickered again. He saw multiple timelines. In one, the chain axe took his head clean off. In another, he dodged, but the Psyker's warp lightning caught him. In a third, he made the shot, but the administrator triggered explosives buried throughout the plant. The distortion faded. Real time reasserted itself. Bean made his choice. He didn't shoot the Psyker. Instead, he shot the chains, suspending a massive cargo container directly above the skeletal cultist. The container dropped. The Psyker screamed, throwing up his hands. Warp energy caught the container, holding it suspended by sheer willpower, which meant he couldn't defend himself. Bean's next shot took the Psyker through the chest. The warp energy vanished. The container crushed the skeletal figure into paste. The massive leader roared in rage and renewed his assault. But Bean had already moved, using the confusion to close on the administrator. She backed away, surprisingly calm, her black eyes studying him with disturbing intensity. "You're different," she said softly. "Not corrupted by chaos, not pure like the Emperor's faithful. You're balanced, untouched." "I don't do sides," Bean said, pistol trained on her forehead. "I do contracts. Your leadership dies today. Tell your people to stand down." She smiled. "Kill me, and you prove the Commissar right. We're just targets to be eliminated. Confirm his worldview. Continue the cycle." She tilted her head. "Or you could listen, hear why we turned from the Emperor's light." Bean's finger tightened on the trigger. Vortin's voice screamed through the Vox speed. "Take the shot. Kill her now before she—" "Shut up, Commissar," Bean said quietly. He didn't lower his weapon. "You've got 10 seconds. Talk." The administrator's black eyes reflected Bean's silhouette like twin voids. Around them, cultists held position, weapons raised but not firing, waiting for her command. The massive leader's chain axe idled, sputtering promethium exhaust. "You want the truth?" The woman's voice was steady despite the pistol aimed at her skull. "We're not monsters who woke up one day craving blood. We were loyal, workers, guardsmen, scribes. We served the Emperor faithfully." She gestured to the sprawling hive beyond. "Do you know what the Imperium's tithe for Mordaxis Prime is? 80% of all production, 80% of our ore, our manufactured goods, our food. Taken to feed wars we'll never see, on worlds we'll never visit." Bean didn't lower his weapon. "Rough taxation doesn't justify demon worship." "No, but starvation does. Watching children die because the Administratum diverted our food supplies to feed soldiers who've been dead for decades. The paperwork just hasn't caught up." Her voice hardened. "The Emperor doesn't protect us. He devours us. We're fuel for a machine that forgot we exist." Vortin's voice crackled urgently through the Vox. "She's lying. Chaos corruption always begins with half-truths, and—" Bean muted the Vox speed. "So you turned to something worse," Bean said. Khorne, the blood god. How's that working out? From where I'm standing, you've traded one oppressor for another. The administrator's smile was bitter. At least Khorne is honest about what he wants. Blood and skulls. No pretense of protection, no false promises of salvation. Just raw power for those strong enough to take it. She took a cautious step forward. Bean's aim didn't waver. We're not trying to summon demons or destroy worlds. We're trying to survive, to carve out one tiny corner of this nightmare universe where we control our own fate. The massive leader growled. Enough philosophy. Let me paint the walls with his... Silence, Gorvax. The administrator didn't look away from Bean. He hasn't killed us yet. That means he's thinking. That makes him dangerous in a different way. Bean's bullet-time perception flickered. He saw fragmentary images. Vortin ordering the orbital strike regardless of his presence. The cultists transforming into full demon hosts. The surrounding hab blocks collapsing as warp rifts opened. The visions contradicted each other. Multiple possible futures bleeding through. Focus. Present moment. The mission. You're right, Bean said slowly. I am thinking. I'm thinking about the 40,000 civilians in the sectors around this plant. Families who don't care about the Emperor or chaos. They just want to survive another day. He shifted his aim slightly, now covering both the administrator and Gorvax. You claim this is about freedom. Prove it. Evacuate the civilians. Move your operation somewhere else. Make your stand without human shields. The administrator's expression flickered. Surprise, calculation, something that might have been respect. You're negotiating with chaos cultists. I'm trying to avoid collateral damage. Big difference. Gorvax spat blood-flecked phlegm. We bow to no one. Not the Emperor. Not some tiny freak who... Bean shot him through the kneecap. The massive cultist crashed down, roaring. His chain axe clattered across the platform. Bean kept his other pistol trained on the administrator, who hadn't moved. I said I don't do unnecessary casualties, Bean said calmly. That applies to cultists too. Next person who interrupts gets worse than a kneecap. He looked back at the administrator. Your people are organized, disciplined. You've got transport capacity. I saw the cargo haulers. Move the operation to the northern wastes. Plenty of space, no civilians. Vortin gets his cult contained outside population centers. You get to continue existing. Everybody wins. Except the Imperium still wants us dead. The Imperium wants everyone dead eventually. That's just Tuesday in this universe. Bean's tone was dry. But today, right now, I can give you a chance. Take it, or watch your people get vaporized by orbital bombardment. The administrator studied him for a long moment. Then she laughed, not maniacal or cruel, but genuinely amused. You're either the most pragmatic being I've ever met, or completely insane. Professional assassin. Comes with the territory. She looked at the cultists surrounding them. 200 pairs of eyes watched, waiting. She looked at Gorvax, clutching his shattered knee and cursing in guttural cant. She looked at the crushed remains of their psyker, still oozing from beneath the cargo container. We accept, she said finally. But understand, the moment the Imperium comes for us, we fight. No mercy, no surrender. Understood. Bean finally lowered his pistol. You've got 48 hours to relocate. After that, I can't guarantee Vortin won't get impatient. The administrator made a sharp gesture. Cultists began moving immediately, securing vehicles, loading equipment, organizing evacuation routes. They moved with military efficiency, confirming Bean's assessment. These weren't mindless fanatics. They were soldiers who'd chosen a different master. Bean reactivated his Vox bead. Vortin's voice exploded immediately. Your position. Bean, respond. I'm initiating bombardment sequence unless you, mission accomplished, being interrupted. Cult leadership neutralized, 1 dead, 1 disabled, 1 in custody. Close enough to the truth. Cultists are evacuating the area. Civilian casualties, 0. Silence then. What do you mean, evacuating? I mean they're leaving, relocating to unpopulated territory. Problem solved without massacring half the hive. That's not protocol. They should be dead, all of them. Protocol said orbital bombardment was acceptable. My contract said minimal collateral damage. I delivered results my way. Bean watched the cultists work with practiced coordination. Unless you want to explain to your superiors why you vaporized 40,000 Imperial citizens when a bloodless solution was available. More silence. Bean could practically hear Vortin's teeth grinding through the Vox. You exceed your authority, Bean. I completed the mission. That was the contract. The mission was to eliminate the cult. The mission was to neutralize the threat. Threats neutralized. They're leaving population centers, moving to containment-viable territory. You can even monitor them if you want. I'll provide coordinates. Bean started making his way off the platform, weapons holstered. Face it, Commissar. I gave you exactly what you needed. Problem solved, civilians alive, resources conserved. That's called efficiency. Vortin's response took nearly 30 seconds. When it came, his voice was ice. Report to my quarters immediately. We need to discuss the definition of loyalty. I never promised loyalty. I promised results. The Vox clicked off. Bean moved through the emptying processing plant, watching cultists dismantle their operations with surprising care. The administrator, she'd never given her name, supervised from a gantry above, that data slate constantly in her hands. She caught Bean's eye and nodded once. Acknowledgement, perhaps even gratitude. Gorvax was being carried by 4 cultists, still cursing but contained. Bean had deliberately avoided killing him. 1 leader dead, 1 disabled, 1 cooperating. Enough to break the cult's immediate threat without complete annihilation. As he climbed back toward the surface levels, Bean's bullet time perception flickered again. This time the vision was clearer. Vortin standing over his body, bolt pistol smoking. An execution for disobedience. For showing mercy where Imperial doctrine demanded extermination. The vision faded. Bean kept climbing. He'd faced authority figures before. Crime bosses, corrupt officials, shadow organizations. They all shared the same flaw. They believed their systems were absolute. That deviation meant death. That control was maintained through fear. Bean had spent his career proving them wrong. But this universe was different. The Imperium wasn't just authoritarian. It was theocratic, totalistic, backed by genuine supernatural powers. And Bean was alone. No support network, no fallback position. Just his skills, his weapons, and his refusal to compromise his principles. The Manufactorum came into view through the hive's smog. Guardsmen patrolled the perimeter. Vortin would be waiting, surrounded by troops, probably planning Bean's execution or imprisonment. Bean checked his ammunition. 1 magazine left, maybe 15 rounds total. He'd faced worse odds. He'd survived worse betrayals. And if Commissar Vortin thought that a title and a uniform made him untouchable, he was about to learn why Killerbean had never failed a contract. Not because he was ruthless, but because he was right. The Commissar's quarters were surrounded. 20 guardsmen in full combat formation, laser guns aimed at the door. Vortin stood at the center, his bolt pistol drawn, his augmented eye clicking rhythmically. The air was thick with tension and the acrid smell of ozone from charging power packs. Killerbean walked through the perimeter without slowing. "Target acquired," a guardsman shouted. "Sir, he's approaching. Should we?" "Hold fire. Vortin commanded. His voice was granite. Let him come. Bean stopped 5 meters from the commissar, hands resting casually on his holstered pistols. The sunglasses reflected 20 gun barrels and one very angry Imperial officer. You wanted to see me, Bean said. You disobeyed direct orders. Vortin's augmented eye zoomed in, analyzing threat markers. You negotiated with Chaos cultists. You allowed them to escape, rather than execute them as Imperial doctrine demands. And worst of all, you muted your Vox when I gave you explicit commands. I completed the mission parameters. Cult threat neutralized, civilians safe, resources conserved. Bean's tone remained flat. That's what you hired me for. I hired you to kill, Vortin snarled, not to play diplomat with the Emperor's enemies. You hired me to solve problems. I solved your problem. Bean took 1 step forward. The guardsmen tensed. The cult's gone. They're relocating to the northern wastes, coordinates already uploaded to your data net. You can monitor them, contain them, even strike them later if you want. But today, 0 civilian casualties, 0 collateral damage. Mission accomplished. Vortin's hand tightened on his bolt pistol. You don't understand the Imperium. Mercy is weakness. Compromise is heresy. Every time you show these cultists compassion, you plant seeds of doubt in my troops. They start to wonder, if the strange bean creature can negotiate with chaos, why can't we? Why must we always choose extermination? Maybe, Bean said quietly, because you've never tried anything else. The guardsman shifted uncomfortably. Vortin's eye twitched. You dare question 10,000 years of Imperial doctrine? Billions have died to keep humanity alive. The Emperor himself sits entombed on the Golden Throne, sacrificing 10,000 psychers daily to maintain the Astronomicon. We endure these horrors because the alternative is extinction. Vortin raised his bolt pistol, aiming directly at Bean's head. And you, a creature from beyond our reality, presume to judge our methods? Bean's hands moved to his pistols, not drawing, just ready. I judge results. You wanted the cult eliminated. It's eliminated. You wanted civilian safety. They're safe. You wanted efficiency. I gave you the most efficient solution possible. His bullet time perception activated, slowing the world. He could see each guardsman's finger pressure on their triggers, calculate firing angles, assess Vortin's micro-expressions. The only reason you're angry is because I didn't do it your way. And in this universe, apparently, innovation is heresy. Innovation? Vortin's laugh was harsh. Is that what you call betraying the Emperor's will? I call it not killing people when I don't have to. Vortin's finger moved to the trigger. The guardsmen raised their weapons. 20 lasguns hummed, ready to fire. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Stand down, Commissar. Everyone froze. An inquisitor stepped through the guardsmen's ranks. She was tall, wrapped in black leather armor beneath a crimson cloak emblazoned with the inquisitorial rosette. Her face was severe, sharp cheekbones, cold gray eyes, a scar running from temple to jaw. At her hip hung a plasma pistol and a force sword that crackled with psychic energy. Behind her walked 2 figures in crimson power armor. Not space marines, their build was wrong, more slender but radiating lethal grace. Inquisitorial stormtroopers, Bean realized. Elite killers who served the Inquisition's will without question. Inquisitor Valdez, Vortin said stiffly, lowering his bolt pistol. I wasn't informed of your arrival. The Inquisition doesn't announce itself. Valdez's gaze fixed on Bean with disturbing intensity. We heard reports of an anomalous entity, a small armed creature that survived warp transit without corruption. Naturally, we were interested. Bean's hands remained on his pistols. And here I thought, I was having a bad day already. Valdez smiled. It didn't reach her eyes. Commissar Vortin, you will stand down your troops. This entity is now under inquisitorial jurisdiction. Ma'am, with respect, this creature disobeyed direct orders and accomplished your mission objective with 0 Imperial casualties, Valdez interrupted. I've reviewed the Vox recordings. His methods were unorthodox but effective. The Administratum will be pleased. You've secured the area without requisitioning orbital bombardment. That saves considerable paperwork and resources. She turned back to Bean. More importantly, his resistance to warp corruption is unprecedented. We need to understand how. I'm not a science experiment, Bean said. No, Valdez agreed. You're far more valuable than that. You're a tactical asset. She gestured to her stormtroopers. Come with us peacefully, and we'll discuss terms of employment far more favorable than Commissar Vortin's crude contract. Resist, and my soldiers will demonstrate why the Inquisition's authority supersedes all others. Bean's bullet time flickered. He saw himself trying to fight, taking down 6 guardsmen before concentrated laser fire brought him down. He saw himself complying, being led to an inquisitorial facility where tests meant dissection and exploitation. He saw himself running, disappearing into the Hive's infrastructure before they could react, becoming a fugitive hunted across the planet. All bad options. Or, Bean said slowly, I walk away. You tell Vortin here to file his report, saying the threat was neutralized by an independent contractor. You forget you ever saw me. Everyone goes home happy. Valdez's smile widened. I'm afraid that's not possible. The moment you touched the warp during your transit, you became a matter of Imperial security. The Inquisition cannot allow an unknown warp-touched entity to operate freely. You represent either a potential weapon for humanity's survival or a threat that must be eliminated. There it is again, Bean said. That binary thinking, weapon or threat, never just person trying to survive. In the 41st millennium, there are no innocent persons, only those who serve the Emperor and those who must die. Valdez's hand moved to her plasma pistol. Choose quickly, asset or corpse. The guardsmen had their weapons trained on Bean again. The stormtroopers had spread out, flanking positions secured. Vortin watched with barely concealed satisfaction. Whatever Bean chose, he'd lost. Bean's perception slowed again. He analyzed the tactical situation with professional detachment. 22 hostiles, all armed, all professional soldiers. Enclosed space, limited cover. His ammunition was nearly depleted, 15 rounds total. Even with his enhanced reflexes and combat skills, the math didn't work. Unless he changed the equation. Inquisitor, Bean said. You mentioned you reviewed the Vox recordings. Did you hear the part where I negotiated with the cult administrator? Valdez's eyes narrowed. I heard you commit borderline heresy. What of it? Then you know I can solve problems other people can't. You know I can operate in situations where Imperial doctrine fails. Bean took his hands off his pistols, raising them slightly. Not surrender, just de-escalation. I'm not interested in joining your Inquisition or becoming your lab rat, but I'm interested in staying alive. So here's my counteroffer. I work as an independent contractor. You call on me when you need someone who thinks outside your rigid system. I complete contracts, you provide resources and amnesty from Imperial persecution. Unacceptable, Vortin snapped. The Imperium doesn't negotiate with... The Imperium, Valdez said thoughtfully, does whatever is necessary to survive. That is the first truth of the Inquisition. She studied Bean like a specimen under glass. You propose a very irregular arrangement. Independent contractors are typically rogue traders or sanctioned mercenaries. You're neither. I'm whatever keeps me useful enough to live and free enough to operate on my own terms." Valdez was silent for a long moment. Her stormtroopers awaited orders. The guardsmen held position. Vortin's face was purple with suppressed rage. Then Valdez laughed, genuine amusement that seemed completely out of place in the grim surroundings. "You have remarkable audacity for something so small," she said. "Very well. I accept your proposal, with conditions. You complete assignments as directed by the Inquisition. You report regularly. You submit to periodic evaluation to ensure no chaos corruption. And if you ever betray the Imperium's interests, I will hunt you to the edge of the galaxy and beyond." "What kind of assignments?" Bean asked. "The kind where Imperial doctrine fails. Infiltration, assassination, negotiations with entities too dangerous or heretical for official contact." Valdez's smile turned predatory. "You're right. You do solve problems others can't. That makes you valuable. Perhaps valuable enough to overlook your independence." Bean's bullet time perception showed no violent futures now, just complicated ones. Contracts that would take him across war zones, face to face with horrors he couldn't imagine yet. But also, survival. Agency. A chance to operate on his own terms in a universe designed to crush individuality. "Deal," Bean said, "but I keep my weapons and my methods. No compromises on how I complete contracts." "Agreed. Results matter more than doctrine." Valdez extended her hand. She'd learned the gesture from the Vox recordings. "Welcome to the shadows of the Imperium, Killerbean. Try not to disappoint me." Bean shook her hand. Behind Valdez, Vortin looked like he was chewing glass. The Inquisitor turned to the Commissar. "File your report as mission accomplished. The anomalous entity has been contained and will be deployed as an inquisitorial asset. Any further inquiries should be directed to my office." She paused. "And, Commissar, next time you find something unusual, contact the Inquisition immediately. We have resources better suited for unique situations." Vortin saluted stiffly. "Yes, ma'am." As Valdez and her stormtroopers left, Bean followed. The guardsmen parted to let them pass, relief visible on their faces. Someone else's problem now. Bean glanced back once. Vortin stood alone in his quarters, staring at the spot where Bean had stood. In his eyes, recognition that the universe was more complicated than Imperial doctrine allowed, and hatred for the small creature who'd proven it. The inquisitorial facility was a black citadel carved into Mordaxus Prime's northern mountain range, far from the hives and manufactorums. Its walls were reinforced plasteel, etched with wards against demonic incursion. Gun emplacements tracked every approach vector. And deep within its armored heart, Inquisitor Valdez maintained her personal operations center. Bean sat in a chair designed for humans, his feet not quite reaching the floor. Across the tactical display table, Valdez reviewed data slates while her stormtroopers stood sentinel by the door. 3 days had passed since their arrangement began. 3 days of evaluation that felt more like interrogation. "Your physiology is fascinating," Valdez said without looking up. "The Adeptus biologists examined your tissue samples. You're organic, but your cellular structure doesn't match any known Xenos species, and your resistance to warp corruption." She finally met his gaze. "You passed through the immaterium unprotected. That should have driven you insane, transformed you into a demon host, or simply dissolved your consciousness. Yet here you sit, unchanged." "Disappointed?" Bean asked. "Intrigued." She set down the data slate. "The Medici theorize your extra-universal origin makes you fundamentally incompatible with the warp's influence, like trying to corrupt something that doesn't recognize corruption as a concept." She leaned forward. "That makes you uniquely suited for operations in high warp environments. Places where even my stormtroopers would be compromised within hours. Sounds dangerous. Everything in the 41st millennium is dangerous. The question is whether you're dangerous enough to survive it. Bean's bullet time perception had stabilized over the past 3 days. The temporal glitches were becoming controllable. He could now trigger them intentionally, perceiving brief glimpses of potential futures. A side effect of his warp transit, Valdez's tech priests theorized. Limited precognition without the vulnerability that plagued Imperial psychers. "I've got your first assignment," Valdez continued. She activated the hololith projector. A planet materialized above the table, a death world covered in toxic jungles and acid seas. Gast 7, border world in the Ultima Segmentum. 2 months ago, an entire Imperial Guard regiment vanished there during a routine sweep. No distress calls, no survivors. Just silence. And you want me to find out what happened. I want you to investigate without triggering whatever killed an entire regiment. Valdez zoomed in on a jungle sector. Conventional forces would be detected immediately. Space Marines would be overkill and draw unwanted attention. But a small, fast operative who can move unseen. She smiled. That's your specialty. Bean studied the hololith. The terrain was brutal. Dense vegetation, unstable ground, atmospheric toxins that would corrode standard equipment within days. What's the strategic value? Why does the Inquisition care about one regiment on a backwater death world? Because, Valdez said quietly, the regiment commander's last encrypted transmission contained one word: Necrons. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Bean had been briefed on the Necrons during his evaluation, ancient machines that had slept for millions of years, awakening to reclaim the galaxy. Soulless, implacable, armed with technology that turned matter into energy and rewrote the laws of physics. If Necrons are awakening on Gast 7, Valdez continued, we need intelligence, force composition, tomb complex locations, strategic objectives. The Imperium can't afford another Necron dynasty establishing territorial claims without proper response. She deactivated the hololith. You'll be inserted via stealth shuttle. Extract within 72 hours. Survive, gather intelligence, return. And if I refuse? Valdez's expression hardened. Then our arrangement ends, and I classify you as a Xenos threat requiring immediate termination. Her hand rested on her plasma pistol. You wanted independence, Bean. This is the price. You work when called. You risk your life in the Emperor's service. In exchange, you remain alive and autonomous. Bean was silent for a moment. Then, I'll need proper equipment. Your human-sized gear doesn't fit, and I need ammunition. My weapons use projectile rounds, not your energy weapons. Already arranged. Valdez gestured to one of her stormtroopers, who brought forward a compact case. Inside, modified combat harness scaled to Bean's dimensions, rebreather mask, Auspex scanner, and most importantly, 20 magazines of ammunition. Custom fabricated by our tech priests. The ammunition is sanctified bolt caliber rounds adapted for your weapons. More stopping power than your standard loads. Bean examined the gear with professional appreciation. Quality work. Someone had actually listened to his specifications. The shuttle departs in 6 hours, Valdez said. My astropaths have already prepared the warp route. You'll arrive in system within 2 weeks, subjective time. She paused. One more thing. If you encounter Necrons directly, don't engage. Your weapons, even enhanced, won't penetrate their living metal. Observe and escape. That's the mission. Understood. Bean loaded the new magazines into his harness. The weight felt right. Familiar. What about backup? Extraction contingencies? You are the contingency. If we send a fleet, the Necrons will mobilize in force. If we send Space Marines, we risk awakening their entire tomb complex. Valdez's voice carried the weight of calculated risk. You're small, fast, untraceable by conventional augurs. You might actually succeed where armies would fail. Or I die alone on a death world and you never hear from me again. That, Valdez agreed, is also a possibility. Bean finished securing his gear. The modified harness distributed weight perfectly, and the rebreather would keep him alive in Gas 7's toxic atmosphere. Everything he needed for a suicide mission disguised as reconnaissance. But that was the job. That had always been the job. He'd survived Shadow Bean operations, corporate hit squads, interdimensional rifts. One more impossibly dangerous mission was just Tuesday. Except this time, he was working for people who saw him as a tool. Useful, yes. Valuable, certainly. But ultimately expendable. When I get back, Bean said, we renegotiate terms. Better equipment, more autonomy. And access to your intelligence network. I need to understand this universe if I'm going to survive it. Valdez raised an eyebrow. Confident you'll return. I always complete my contracts. Then we have an understanding. Valdez stood, extending her hand. The Emperor protects Killerbean, though in your case I suspect you'll be doing most of the protecting yourself. Bean shook her hand and left the operations center. The stormtroopers watched him go, their expressions unreadable behind helmets, but their body language spoke volumes. Curiosity, uncertainty, perhaps even respect. He made his way through the facility's corridors, past servo skulls and servitors, past guardsmen who stared at the small armed figure moving with such purpose. Everyone knew what he was now, the Inquisitor's strange weapon, the anomaly from beyond the stars. The shuttle bay was cavernous, filled with attack craft and transport vessels. His assigned shuttle was small, barely larger than a fighter, painted matte black with minimal markings. Stealth configuration. The pilot was already aboard, running pre-flight checks. Bean climbed the boarding ramp and secured himself in the passenger compartment. Through the viewport, he could see Mordaxis Prime stretching below, the hives, the manufactorums, the endless sprawl of imperial industry. 40 billion souls grinding through existence, never questioning their lot, never imagining anything beyond service and death. He'd been in this universe less than 2 weeks. Already he'd fought cultists, negotiated with Chaos worshippers, been recruited by the Inquisition, and now faced deployment against ancient machine gods. And somehow, impossibly, he was still alive. His bullet-time perception flickered. He saw fragmentary futures, crashing in Gas 7's jungles, pursued by skeletal machines. Standing before a vast tomb complex as reality itself bent around Necron technology. Fighting desperately in the toxic darkness, ammunition running dry, nowhere to run. But also, returning successful. Intelligence gathered, mission complete. Valdez's respect earned. A place, however precarious, in the 41st millennium's shadows. The visions faded. The shuttle's engines roared to life. Bean checked his Desert Eagles one final time. Loaded. Ready. His reflection in the polished metal showed a small figure wrapped in combat gear, sunglasses reflecting his own determined expression. Killerbean had fallen into hell, but hell, he was learning, was relative. In a universe of endless war, where mercy was weakness and individuality was heresy, perhaps there was room for one small assassin who refused to play by the rules, who completed contracts his way, who proved that size meant nothing when backed by skill, precision, and absolute unwillingness to submit. The shuttle lifted off, punching through Mordaxis Prime's toxic atmosphere toward the waiting void. Behind him, the Imperium's grinding certainty. Before him, unknown dangers on a death world where an entire regiment had vanished. Bean settled into his seat, weapons close, mind clear. Just another job, just another impossible mission, just another day in the 41st millennium. And if the Necrons thought they'd seen every threat the galaxy had to offer, they were about to learn that sometimes the deadliest things came in the smallest packages. The shuttle entered the warp. Reality twisted. But Killerbean, extra-universal anomaly, professional assassin, and the Inquisition's newest asset remained unchanged. In the grim darkness of the far future, there was only war. But war had just met something it didn't expect. Someone who fought on his own terms. The warp journey was 14 days of madness held at bay by ancient technology and desperate faith. Bean watched through reinforced viewports as impossible colors bled through reality, as demons pressed against Geller fields with hunger older than stars. But the shuttle's protections held, and Bean, incompatible with the Immaterium's touch, felt nothing but mild discomfort, like static electricity crawling across his surface. When they translated back into real space above Gast 7, the pilot voxed back, "You're either blessed by the Emperor or cursed by something worse. No one passes through the warp that calmly." "I'm just good at my job," Bean replied. The death world filled the viewport, a sphere of toxic green and sickly yellow, its atmosphere churning with acidic storms. Somewhere down there, an entire regiment had vanished. Somewhere below, ancient machines stirred from millions of years of sleep, and somewhere in that hostile wilderness, answers waited. Bean checked his gear one final time. Ammunition, full, weapons, ready, determination, absolute. The shuttle began its descent, stealth systems engaged, sliding through Gast 7's atmosphere like a ghost. Bean's bullet time perception flickered, showing him fragments of what might come. Combat in toxic jungles, evasion through tomb complexes, desperate fights against impossible odds. But also, survival, success, return. He'd survived falling into the 41st millennium. He'd survived first contact with the Imperium. He'd negotiated with Chaos cultists and Inquisitors alike. He'd carved out a place in a universe designed to crush anyone who didn't conform. Because Killerbean had learned the fundamental truth of this dark millennium. The Imperium survived through adaptation, even if it never admitted it. 10,000 years of brutal evolution had created a civilization that endured through pragmatism, disguised as faith. And sometimes, rarely, but sometimes, that pragmatism had room for anomalies, for weapons that didn't fit standard classifications, for solutions that orthodox doctrine couldn't imagine. The shuttle touched down in a clearing of corroded metal and dying vegetation. The boarding ramp descended. Toxic air hissed against the hull. Bean activated his rebreather, felt it seal against his form, and stepped out into hell. Above him, 3 diseased moons hung in a purple sky. Around him, the jungle writhed with unnatural life, plants that shouldn't exist. Ecosystems twisted by radiation and worse. And beneath his feet, he felt the faint vibration of ancient machinery awakening. The Necrons were here. And Killerbean, professional assassin, extra-universal anomaly, and perhaps the smallest but most stubborn being in the 41st millennium, was going to find them. The shuttle lifted off behind him, vanishing into the toxic clouds. He was alone now. No backup, no extraction guarantee. Just his skills, his weapons, and his refusal to accept that any mission was truly impossible. He'd fallen into a universe of gods and monsters, where faith moved mountains and madness wore the faces of prophets. Where entire worlds burned for the sin of weakness and mercy was the rarest commodity in existence. But he was still standing, still fighting, still refusing to kneel. In the 41st millennium, There was only war, and war had just become personal. Bean moved into the toxic jungle, his desert eagles gleaming in the diseased light. Somewhere ahead, answers waited. Somewhere beyond, the Inquisition watched and wondered if their strange weapon would return. And somewhere, in the dark spaces between stars, in the twisted corridors of the warp, in the cold calculations of awakening tomb worlds, forces ancient and terrible took notice of the small anomaly that had invaded their reality. They would learn, as others had learned before them, that size was no measure of danger, that the smallest being could carry the deadliest purpose, that sometimes the thing you underestimated was the thing that killed you. Killerbean had contracts to fulfill, missions to complete, a place to carve out in the darkness. And nothing, not the Imperium's dogma, not Chaos's corruption, not ancient machines or cosmic horrors, was going to stop him. He was a professional, and professionals always completed their contracts. The Emperor protects. More stories await.